Hey everyone, we are back with Chapter 2, Lesson 5. And today what we are going to be doing is solving one-step equations. Now remember, we talked about expressions and equations a couple videos back. And remember, equations is when there's an equal sign like this. Okay, so we're solving one-step equations. So it's equations where there's only one step. And really when we're trying to solve it, what we're solving for is we're trying to figure out what x is. Now, to figure out what x is, the variable, what we have to do is we have to get x by itself. All right, now a few basics. Whenever you have an equation, the equal sign, what I like to do is that kind of divides the equation into two sides. Everything over here on this side of the equation, in this area, this would be the left side of the equation, all right? So this is the left side. Oh. And then everything over here would be considered the right side of the equation. And so the equal sign splits it into two sides. Okay, so to figure out what x is, you need x by itself on one side of the equation. It doesn't matter if it's on the left or the right, but right now x is on the left side of the equation. So we really need everything, the only thing to be on the left side to be x. So it looks something like this. It would look like x equals and then something. That's what you need to do to figure out what x is. So this is kind of just the beginning of algebra. So we want to get x by itself. Right now, x is not by itself. There's this -6 and this plus. So -6 plus x, all right? So in order to get x by itself, what you have to do is you have to do something that's called inverse operations. Now, there's a lot of inverse operations, and the more you learn about mathematics, the more inverse operations you learn about. But just to name a couple, so addition, I'm just using a plus sign. The inverse operation of addition would be subtraction. And they go vice versa. So the inverse operation of subtraction would be addition. And we can talk about this as a positive and a negative. The inverse of a positive is a negative. The inverse of a negative is a positive, and so on. So that's addition and subtraction, or positive and negative. They mean the same thing, pretty much. The other inverse operations would be multiplication and division. Those are inverse operations of each other. You know, and just to throw another one out, you're not going to see this for a while, but if you have a number squared, an inverse operation of a squared number would be a square root. And there's lots and lots and lots of more inverse operations. And but this is just, you know, to get started. And really the only two that you're going to be concerned about for a long time are just these two right here. So let's see. Okay, so here, what we do, we want to get x by itself. So we look at it and we say, hey, what's around x? Well, obviously, there is this -6 plus, okay? So we want to say, hey, how is all of this related to x? And if you see, it's related to x through the operation of addition. Now, when it is addition, what you have is you have basically two options. You are in this category right here. This is the category you're dealing with. So it's one of those two options. Okay? And when you have one of those two, you look at the -6. And basically you say, hey, what's the opposite of -6? And the opposite of -6 would be a +6. So what you do is you add +6 to this -6. Now, what happens when you have -6 to +6? Well, what happens is those two completely cancel each other out. -6 plus 6 is actually equal to 0, which means that the only thing that you have left on this side of the equation, I'm going to write that equals x, is x. Now, x is by itself. But with an equation, you have to keep things equal. So what that means is if you add 6 to this side, right now at the beginning, if I go back, -6 plus 6 equals -7. this right over here is equal to negative 7. They are equal. When you add 6 to this side, it has now, they're not equal anymore. It would be like if you had right now, have you ever seen those, just don't laugh at my drawing here, but have those like scales where they have a scale, you know, and you put stuff on it and they measure the weight? Well, right now, before we added the 6, they are equal. But when you add 6, and what happens to the scale here, just when you add 6 to this, the scale goes like this. And this one goes way up in the air like that. That's with the plus 6. It weighs this one down on this side. So now the equation is not equal. It's not an equal equation because we've only added 6 to this side. So the biggest thing is whenever you're dealing with equations, if you add 6 to this side, you have to add 6 to this side. And that's why the equation, it's just like a scale. If it's equal and you add the same amount of weight to both sides, it's still going to be level. It's still going to be equal. But if you only add 6 to one side, it's not going to be equal. This is going to be way down and that's going to go way up in the air. So when we added 6 to this side, we also have to add 6 to this side as well. And now the equation is in an equal state. And that's great because it served two purposes. Our equation is still equal to each other because we added the same amount to both sides. This is now canceled. That's 0, and we have x by itself. Now we just need to do this. Negative 7 plus 6. Well, negative 7, that is a negative. This is a positive number. And when the signs are different, you take the difference. And the difference between 7 and 6 is 1. And then you see, hey, is it a negative 1 or a positive 1? We look at 7, we look at 6. Which number's bigger? 7's bigger and 7's negative. So our answer is negative 1. Okay? So that's really how you solve a one-step equation. There was just one step. You add 6 to both sides. Now, I know some of you could probably just look at this and figure out what number would make this true, and that's a great, just being able to have that skill is awesome. But what this process is doing is it's setting you up for bigger and bigger algebraic problems that you're not going to be able to do in your head. And so you have to learn these skills because it's a system of rules that you have to follow in order to solve really, really complicated algebraic things like, I don't know, like this. 2 multiplied by x minus 2 squared minus 4x plus 6x minus 2 equals 11. Something like that. You have to learn algebra at the most basic skill, and then you build and build and build, and before you know it, you can solve things that look like this. Like it's no problem. So this is the start to algebra. So I want you to show your work. I want you to do it exactly like it is now. Now we're not done because what it says is solve each equation, which we did. We figured out that x equals negative 1. And now we need to check our answer. So I want you to write the word check. And then you're going to write this original equation. Negative 6 plus x equals negative 7. But now what we're going to do is we're going to check it for when x equals negative 1, which is the answer that we found here. Now, if we found the right answer, what that means is you should be able to put negative 1 here for x, and you should get the same number. If you get the same number, that means that the answer that you found is correct. If you get two different answers, like then that would mean whatever answer you put in for x, this is not the right answer. So let's go ahead and stick it in. So we have negative 6 plus, I'm sticking in a negative number for a variable, so I need to put it in parentheses, equals negative 7. And then I'm just going to do this, negative 6 plus a negative 1. This is negative, this is negative. Whenever you have two negative numbers, remember you just add the numbers. 6 plus 1 is 7, and they're both negative, so our answer is going to be negative. So this is negative 7 equals negative 7. That is a true statement, which means that the number that we stuck into this equation is the answer to that equation. So we did it correctly. So I'm going to give us a woohoo, just because I feel it's needed. Okay, on to 1B. All right. So we're going to solve this problem and check the answer. So here, For this, they change up the letter. We're not dealing with X now. We're dealing with P. Not a big deal. It can really be any letter. And so if you look, I'm going to draw a line straight down. Our question is, this is the left side, this is the right side. Is P by itself on this side of the equation? And the answer is no, it is not. There's this little +5 there. So we need to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of it by inverse operations. Now, how is this 5 related to the P? Well, it's obvious that the 5 is related through addition. So that means we're either going to be doing addition or subtraction here. And if we look, right, the inverse operations, we want to know what is the opposite. 5 is positive. What is the opposite of a positive 5? And we know that the opposite of a positive 5 would be a negative 5, right? Because a positive 5 and a negative 5 is going to equal 0, which means it's going to go away, which means all we're going to be left with is P on this side of the equation. And voila, we have P by itself, which is exactly what we want. So because it's an equation, we have to do things equally. So positive 5, negative 5, those are going to cancel out. Whatever we do to this side, we have to do to this side. So we have a -3 minus 5, okay? So -3 is negative, 5 is negative. We have two negative numbers. So whenever you have two negative numbers, what you do is you add the numbers together. 3 plus 5 is 8. And then you keep the negative with both of those. So our answer is P equals -8. Now let's go ahead and check that and see if we did it correctly. So I'm going to write the original equation on your note sheets. I should see that original equation on every single one of your note sheets. So there we go. Original equation, P equals -8. We're going to stick -8 in for P. So -8 plus 5 equals -3. Okay, we have a negative number and a positive number. The signs are different. We take the difference, and the difference between 8 and 5 is 3. And then we look at what number's bigger, 8 or 5. 8 is bigger, 8 is negative, so it ends up being a -3 equals -3, which is a true statement. So that means, yes, we did it correctly. That means that P equals -8 is the answer to this equation. All right, let's go move on to example 1C. What do we have here? Example 1C, right here. Okay, perfect. Y minus 9 equals -40. So we're trying to get y by itself. Okay, on this side of the equation, there's the equation. Is y by itself? No, there's a -9. So we have to do the opposite of -9, which would be a +9 to both sides. The -9 and the +9, they cancel out. They're 0. We now have y by itself. And then we have -40 plus 9. So it's a negative and a positive. So the signs are different. We take the difference. So I'm just going to figure out what is the difference between 40 and 9. I'm going to borrow. That would be 1. That's a 3. 31. Now, is it a positive 31 or a negative 31? Let's look at 40 and 9. 40 is bigger. 40 is negative. So the answer is a -31. And we need to go ahead and check our answer. So remember, on every single check, I want you writing that original equation, y minus 9 equals -40. Perfect. And then we're going to substitute -31 in for y. We're going to see if this is the correct answer. So instead of writing y, I'm writing -31 because that's what y equals. Just rewriting all the other stuff. And then we have a negative number and another negative number. Whenever you have two negative numbers, you add the numbers together and keep the sign. So 31 plus 9 is 40. Keep the sign. And so there we go. We have a true statement. So we did it correctly. Y equals -31 is the answer. So now what I want you to do, I want you to go ahead and check it out for example 1. I want you to go ahead and pause. Pause it. Here's our little friend, the pause dragon, coming to remind us to pause it, finish these problems, and when you get done, go ahead and check your answers. So you're going to have 1A, 1B, and 1C. And I will see you back in a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and solve these. So we have -3 plus x equals -9. So we're trying to figure out what x is. And make sure you checked each answer. If you didn't check it, pause it and write the original equation, go through that whole process. Okay, so here we go. We got -3 plus x equals -9. So -3 is related through addition, but we look at -3 and negative it's a negative number. So we need to do the opposite of a negative number, which is a positive, to both sides of the equation. So that cancels out. We're left with x equals, we have a negative and a positive number, so we take the difference. The signs are different. We take the difference. The difference between 9 and 3 is 6. Which number is bigger? 9 is bigger, 9's negative. So our answer is a -6 right there. Let's go ahead and check it. So we're going to stick in -6 for x. And whenever you stick in a negative number for a variable, you put it in parentheses. I always like to have my equal signs lined up so you could draw a line through all of them. A little off there, and this one isn't so good, but just thought I'd let you know that. Okay, so we have two negative signs, a -3 and a -6. So when you have two negative numbers, you add the numbers and keep the sign. So 3 plus 6 is 9, and we keep the sign. And so we have -9 equaling -9, and that is a true statement. Okay, let's go on to check it out, 1B. Let's see how you did. You should already have this problem worked out. So let's check and see how you did. Okay, we are trying to figure out what Q is. We need Q by itself. So it is the only thing on this side of the equal sign. But right now it's not. There's this +2. So it's related to Q. 2 is related to Q through addition. So we need to do the inverse of this positive number, which would be a negative number. So we're going to subtract 2 to both sides. A +2 and a -2, that equals 0. So they cancel out, which leaves us with Q. Now we have Q by itself. -6 minus 2, -6, that's a negative number. 2 is a negative number. We have two negative numbers together, so we just add the numbers and keep the sign. So 6 plus 2 is 8, and we keep the sign, which is negative. So that is what Q is, -8. I hope you got that, but let's see how you did on the check. So you're going to write the word check. You're going to write the original equation, Q plus 2 equals -6. And then we're going to stick in -8 for Q. Whenever you stick in a negative number for a variable, make sure you put it in parentheses. Plus 2, let's see if my equal sign's lined up. Yep, so far they are lined up. Now we're just going to work this out. We have a negative number and a positive number. So the signs are different. We take the difference between 8 and 2. The difference between 8 and 2 is 6. And then we need to figure out the sign. Which number is bigger, 8 or 2? 8 is bigger, 8 is negative, so our answer is negative. So we have -6 equaling -6. That is a true statement, which means that the answer that we stuck in for Q is the answer. It's the solution to our original equation. Okay, hopefully you got that right. If you did, great job. Okay, on to check it out, example C. We have y minus 7 equals -34. So we are trying to get y by itself. At this moment, it is not by itself. There's this -7 there. So we need to get rid of it. We got to do the opposite. The inverse operation of a -7 would be a +7 to both sides. So those cancel. We're left with y equals -34 plus 7. That's a negative. This is a positive. The signs are different. We take the difference. So 34 minus 7. I got to figure out what that is. I have to borrow. 14 minus 7 is 7. We drop the 2. We end up with 27. Now we need to figure out if it's positive or negative. We look at 34 and 7. Which number is bigger? 34 and 34 is negative, so our answer is going to be negative. Okay, perfect. Let's check it and see if it's right. Okay, so I'm writing y, write the original equation. I'm sticking in -27 for y. When you stick in a negative number for a variable, go ahead and put it in parentheses. Okay, I have a negative number here and a negative number here. Since I have two negative numbers, I add them and keep the sign. So 27 plus 7. 7 plus 7 is 14. 1 plus 2 is 3 is 34. Keep the sign. And so that's a true statement, which means we got it right. So if you got that right, great job. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.